Good morning everyone, as it is in Brazil. My name is Remy Kinna. I'm an Honorary Research Associate with the Institute for Marine and Environmental Law at the Faculty of Law with the University of Cape Town in South Africa. And the topic of my presentation is the future role of international water law in transboundary freshwater governance, and how can global water conventions support existing and future basin agreements to resolve water conflicts. So moving on to slide 2 of my presentation. So what is the main environmental problem and challenge? Well, worldwide there are 263 transboundary river basins that cover approximately half the Earth's surface. And those basins contain roughly 40% of the global population, and they supply over 60% of the freshwater used worldwide each year. Saying that, there are frequent and intense competition between states and other actors for those limited resources of freshwater. There are 145 nations which have part of their territory within an international basin, and 21 countries are situated entirely within an international basin. On to slide 3. There are significant threats, as we know, to freshwater quality and quantity around the world. And three key areas are: there are more frequent pollution incidents from industrial and agricultural point and non-point sources. One example being the Samarco mine spill in Brazil last year, and the diffuse pesticide, fertilizer and livestock runoff polluting rivers, as is the case across the world, but frequent examples are cited recently regarding agricultural contamination in China and US rivers. There's also escalating scarcity due to more dramatic seasonal and precipitation variability, plus rising temperatures from climate change, leading to chronic droughts as we're seeing around the world, one notably within southern Africa, but also here where I'm based in the Mekong River Basin. There's also proliferating large-scale infrastructure projects around freshwater sources that are altering water flows, sedimentation loads and aquatic species breeding environments. So, and another example of that is hydropower dams along the Mekong River mainstream and the tributaries. Moving on to slide 4. So what is the key legal issue? So in the lead up to the Conference of the Parties 21 in December last year for the UNFCCC, much of the talk was around a treaty shaping future access to and benefit sharing of global freshwater resources. Some people went to the extent of arguing that any agreements would actually ultimately determine the fate of shared waters globally, and that this would make or break the prospect of burgeoning water wars, so to speak, as they've been coined, the phrase, involving many of the world's transboundary river basins and transboundary lakes. Given the geopolitical and socio-economic importance placed on these increasingly scarce and increasingly degraded freshwater resources that are shared between states and other stakeholders, it's no wonder then that the popular notion of water wars is rising. On to slide 5. So what are the legal mechanisms and or areas of reform? Well, the water wars discourse overlooks the continuing role of international water law, specifically regional, basin and sub-basin agreements, in bringing states and other stakeholders together to cooperate in order to prevent, ameliorate and ultimately resolve any potential conflicts over water. And what we have is history shows us that conflicts over freshwater are not a new phenomenon by any stretch, and the last war specifically over water was fought way back in 2500 BC. The past has ultimately demonstrated that shared water is more so a catalyst for cooperation than a source of conflict. And this is mainly due to the role of international water agreements over these shared freshwater resources, which leads me to the fact that for the first time in history, we now have 2 global water conventions in force. Moving on to slide 6. So what are the legal mechanisms or areas for reform that I'm specifically talking about? So there are 2 global conventions governing the use of shared waters. One is the UN Watercourses Convention. This was adopted in 1997 by the UN General Assembly, and it entered into force in 2014 when Vietnam was the 35th party to the convention in August, and so it entered into force in August last year, in 2014, sorry. So it's a global baseline framework developed and negotiated over the course of 40 years. So there was a lot of negotiations that went into developing this convention, and it codifies principles and procedures that were already developing and recognised under customary international law. And it's also a convention that's referred to by international courts and tribunals in state disputes over shared water resources, such as the Hungarian dams case, and also in the pulp mills on the River Uruguay case, which was referred to by the International Court of Justice. The second global convention is the UNECE Water Convention. This was adopted in 1992 by the UNECE, and it entered into force in 1996. It was originally a regional convention and focused mainly on the maintaining water quality standards. It's also since then developed an extensive implementation portfolio and experience, and also a very extensive institutional capacity with multiple agencies working underneath the Secretariat on different areas of freshwater governance. And which leads me to the fact that in 2012 there was an amendment introduced to the convention, which means that it's now open to nations globally to join. So the UN Watercourses Convention and the UNECE Water Convention, which was originally regional, are both now global conventions in force. So what needs to be considered in addition to these legal frameworks? Well, research around global conventions' role in filling the gaps and reinforcing treaties to challenge this so-called water wars narrative. So in my mind, a crucial niche has really opened up for closely examining the role of having 2 global conventions in force, and how their ratification and mutually reinforcing implementation could supplement and buttress and really enhance existing but also future transboundary river and lake agreements between states at the sub-basin, basin and regional levels in order to strengthen water cooperation. And central to this idea is to bridge the divide from international relations theory on water security and hydropolitics, and take that to and link it to the global framework mechanisms, the legal mechanisms for transboundary cooperation and dispute resolution processes within international water law, as it is still mainly viewed through the lenses of bilateral, multilateral and regional treaties. So taking it up to the global level and looking at those 2 conventions to see how they can really strengthen and support cooperation at scales below that. Moving on to the next slide. So I just wanted to say thank you. I wish you all the best for your time in Brazil, and please, if you have any questions or queries, feel free to email me on the email address shown on the slide. So thank you for your time, and all the best.